response to an invitation by Venezuela's National Electoral Council, the European Union decided to send an election observation mission to observe the regional and local elections scheduled for November 21st. A federal court judge in the Brazilian capital has dismissed an attempt to reopen the Lava Jato investigation against former President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva. And people took to the streets of Bahrain's capital on Thursday to protest the visit by the Israeli Foreign Minister and opening of the Israeli embassy. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your host, Gladys Quesada, and now we begin with the news. In response to an invitation by the National Electoral Council of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the European Union has decided to send an election observation mission to observe the regional and the local elections scheduled for November 21st. The bloc's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, appointed Isabel Santos as chief observer of the 2021 EU election observation mission to Venezuela. The core team of the mission consists of 11 election experts who will arrive in Caracas in October. Following the EU election observation methodology, the mission will issue a final report that will be presented and shared with stakeholders after the finalization of the entire electoral process. The move represents a step forward in relations with the bloc, which has previously refused to recognize elections held in the country.
It pleases us very much to be here at this time to thank the Chargé d'Affaires of the European Union in Venezuela for his participation in this exchange of copies of this administrative agreement, which, as the country is well aware, was agreed upon just a few hours ago.
For his part, the Chargé d'Affaires of the European Union to Venezuela, Rafael de Chao Moreno, underlined the importance of accompanying the electoral process in the country.
That we will be following all European standards, where the long experience of the electoral union's electoral observations in the four corners of the planet is also brought here to Venezuela to specifically benefit this electoral process. We are also happy to see that these are elections where there will be a broad participation, and we believe that the basis of democracy is precisely to give citizens the possibility to choose between different political options.
The electoral campaign began in Argentina on Thursday as parties prepare for the upcoming legislative election on November 14th. Both the ruling Everybody's Front coalition and the largest opposition force in the country, the right-wing Together for Change coalition, are preparing the logistics for their campaigns and the election day. The ruling front is seeking to reverse its defeat in the primary elections, which has seen a change of several ministers and a new strategy. On the other hand, the opposition are hoping to consolidate the victory secured in the capital, Buenos Aires, and obtaining 3.2 million votes in the primaries. The Dock Workers Union of Uruguay paralyzed all operations at Montevideo for 72 hours to demand labor rights and reject the privatization of the port terminal. Our correspondent, Mateo Grille, brings us more details in the following report.
At the Montevideo port, this week, employees of the port companies TCP and Montecom suspended their activities for 72 hours, meaning there were no foreign trade operations and thousands of containers were parked at the port.
This strike responds specifically to the failure in negotiation a bipartite agreement between the TCP workers and the company, that it is. We have been coming to the Ministry of Labor for more than 6 months, and well, there comes a time when you get tired of the situation. Last week, the company decided to reject everything we had more or less agreed upon and left us with no other way out but to adopt this measure.
Workers denounce that the company refuses to guarantee a minimum of 15 paid days work per month, and also reject an agreement by which the government granted TCP the exclusive concession for the operation of the container terminal until 2081. The Broad Front opposition party even recently filed a criminal complaint against this agreement. We have come here to file the criminal complaint because, according to the thesis of the Broad Front, A series of very serious crimes have been committed to the detriment of the country, to the detriment of the public administration, crimes and actions that are illegitimate, abuses of the legal forms. The dock workers' strike action paralyzed the country's foreign trade and was harshly criticized by the government, which said the national economy was suffering at a time when trade needed to be reactivated. When the whole world is asking for shipping lines to come because they are scarce, we all felt heartbroken when we saw a ship or ships leaving without loading and unloading. I understand the demand. What does not seem logical to us at this moment in the country is that the most important port for our work and our goods is being paralyzed. The strike action, which was respected by all workers, proved strength of the port operators and succeeded in bringing the company in question into negotiations with the Ministry of Labor within a few hours. As for the criminal complaint of the container terminal concession, the legal authorities have already intervened in the matter.
Thank you, Mateo, for this report, and now we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South, more news now. Now, yet another attempt to reopen legal proceedings against former Brazilian President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva has been quashed, marking the 20th straight legal victory for Lula. More details with our correspondent, Brian Mier.
Last March, after the Brazilian Supreme Court reversed all convictions of former President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva related to the Lava Jato investigation, which was a partnership between the U.S. Department of Justice and a small group of public prosecutors in the Curitiba district, many Anglo journalists tried to insinuate that Lula could still be convicted in another district. In fact, what the Supreme Court did was they nullified all evidence that had been presented against Lula in the ambit of Lava Jato and threw out the convictions because of illegal forum shopping, specifying that if someone wanted to try to reopen charges without any of the evidence that was used in Lava Jato, they should do it in an appropriate court district, and they designated Brasilia as this district. So this morning, Brasilia Federal District Court Judge Poliana Maciel rejected a move by prosecutors to reopen the investigation against Lula in the Itabaia vacation property case. This was the second and more flimsy of the Lava Jato convictions of Lula. It was based on allegations that Lula had accepted illegal reforms on a vacation property. But the case had several problems. First of all, the property in question was registered in the name of somebody else, and it wasn't just a random person. It was the former mayor of Campinas. Secondly, there was no material evidence presented. Just as in the case of the triplex apartment, the only evidence that prosecutors had ever shown was a coerced plea bargain testimony made by a convicted criminal in exchange for massive sentence reduction and partial retention of illicit assets. So what this ruling today really does is it sends a message out that it's going to be almost impossible, legally speaking, to remove Lula from next year's presidential elections. It looks like Lula's candidacy is more solid than ever.
Thank you, Brian, for this report. Now we continue. Thousands of people marched in El Salvador on Thursday against the use of Bitcoin in the economy, rising poverty and unemployment, and against a decree that ordered the dismissal of a third of all judges. The march in San Salvador came as opposition to the legalization of Bitcoin as legal tender grows, as well as condemnation of President Nayib Bukele's moves to further bolster his power over government branches. A recent provision of the Congress, which is dominated by allies of the president, passed all judges aged over 60 or with 30 years of service into automatic retirement. Last Sunday, the Supreme Court of Justice resolved to maintain almost half of the judges that will be removed from their positions due to the decision approved by the legislative. The rule reached 249 judges, 1/3 of the total.
The purpose of this is to manipulate the judiciary in favor of the regime and to manipulate judicial decisions to persecute other sectors, to persecute anyone who raises their voice. So, if they already have the police, They already have the prosecutor's office, and now they want to have the judges, as well, to manipulate everything in their favor. He is lying to the Salvadorian people, saying that they are persecuting the corrupt, but inside the government there are corrupt people. The main one being the president, who does not act to remove these corrupt people from the government. He is buying himself an army of journalists to say that the government is fine and that all laws are fine, even though the people are suffering from hunger, because everything is more expensive and everything has gone up in prices. We need jobs, we need people to work. There is no need for the president to go around handing out food boxes.
It is unfortunate how the state, the government, use the security forces to intimidate us. The National Civil Police is there to look after the people in the streets, because outside they're killing. People are disappearing and many mothers are crying for their children.
And more than 1,000 indigenous people of different ethnic groups in Colombia remain homeless in the capital, Bogotá, after being displaced from their territories as a result of violence. After being forcibly evicted from their homes in the Vista Hermosa neighborhood of Ciudad Bolívar, groups of indigenous families set up makeshift camps in the National Park of Bogotá. On Wednesday night, the mobile anti-riot squad of the Colombian police force, notorious for its repression, violently moved to prevent the indigenous families from taking over the park, where they are calling on the authorities to provide housing. Many of the families were receiving economic support to pay rent in the face of the economic crisis aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the end to these payments saw them. Others have arrived in the capital after having fled violence in their rural home territories. Now we address other topics. Authorities in Thailand have rushed to protect parts of Bangkok from floodwaters that have already inundated several homes and killed 7 people in the country's northern and central provinces. The Department of Disaster Prevention and Mitigations said 2 people remain missing following the flooding triggered by Tropical Storm Dianmu. The department also announced that nearly 200,000 households in 30 provinces, mostly in the north, northeast, and the central regions, had been affected, a 56% increase over the numbers recorded a day earlier. Heavy rains are still forecast for many areas. The massive amounts of water have overwhelmed dams and reservoirs, resulting in immediate warnings being issued to Bangkok and its surrounding provinces. According to officials at the United States Geological Survey, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano has erupted after hours of increased activity. The alert level has been raised to the highest level, but there is no immediate threat to populated areas. The eruption began on Wednesday morning when the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory detected a glow, like looking at webcam images from the volcano summit. Lava became visible at a short time later, and the eruption appeared to intensify during the night. The Hawaii Red Cross elevated the volcano alert level from watch to warning and its aviation color code from orange to red, as the new eruption and associated hazards are evaluated. Authorities in Kenya battled a raging fire that has swept vast vegetation fields on Mount Longonot. Firefighters joined emergency response teams that included the Kenya Wildlife Service to contain the fire, whose smoke was visible from miles away. An immediate assessment from officials showed that mostly vegetation has been affected and most wildlife in the ecosystem has withdrawn to safe areas. Officials suspect the fire was started by people grazing animals or hikers who frequent the mountain for its beautiful trails. The mountain is also home to hundreds of birds and is frequented by bird watchers from across the world. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. People took to the streets of Bahrain's capital on Thursday to protest the opening of the Israeli embassy. The rally in Manama came as the Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid visited the country and opened the embassy 1 year after the United States brokered the normalization of ties between the two nations. The first bilateral ministerial visit to the Gulf country and embassy opening are part of a thaw in relations after the United Arab Emirates, Morocco and Sudan also agreed last year to establish ties with Israel under agreements known as the Abraham Accords. The moves sparked outrage as they broke with decades of Arab consensus that there will no be relations with the Israeli regime while the Palestinian question remains unresolved. As protesters took to the streets, the hashtag Bahrain rejects Zionists in Arabic circulated on social media. And a spokesperson from the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, referred to the Israeli foreign minister's visit to Bahrain, noting that the move only serves Zionist interests.
The occupying country's foreign minister's visit to Bahrain to open an embassy is an insistence by the Bahraini regime on the national scene it committed. By signing the normalization agreement, this agreement, visit, and the opening of the embassy only serve the Zionist interests and narrative, but harms our people, their cause and their legitimate struggle.
Thousands of people flooded the streets of Sudan capital on Thursday against the country's military rulers and demanding the formation of new, exclusively civilian transitional authorities. The rallies in Khartoum came more than a week after a coup bid involving military officers, which laid bare divisions between the military and civilian groups sharing power. Military sources said the thwarted coup was led by a group of officers linked to the regime of imprisoned former President Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted in 2019. Demonstrators demanded an exclusively civilian transitional government, while accusing the generals currently in power of derailing Sudan's transition to democracy. Similar rallies were also organized in several other cities across towns in the country.
If this revolution succeeds in achieving civilian transition, it needs to remove all the officers who are in charge of the armed forces and who originally belonged to the Sudanese Islamic movement. Therefore, their leadership of our armed forces is considered as a major obstacle to the stability of the democratic state and the achievement of the transitional period. We say to Burham, hand over the rule, the homeland awaits us to build it. This is the clear message of the revolutionaries, as it is our right to take it, the rule, by force, and that is why we choose either the civilian rule or chaos. The 30th of September is an assurance for a civilian rule, and the continuity of the December revolution to achieve a civilian state.
Delegates from rival state institutions in Libya met in Morocco on Thursday to discuss a new electoral law as the war-torn country gears up for December elections under a UN-led peace process. The move comes after rival political groups agreed in February to form an interim unity government to lead the country to presidential and parliamentary elections scheduled for December 24th. The two sides, representing the oil-rich country plagued by conflict since the 2011 NATO-led military intervention and the assassination of leader Muammar Gaddafi, have yet to agree on a constitutional basis that will regulate the conduct of the planned elections. Recently, tensions rose between the parliament, the High Council of State, and the unity government concerning electoral powers and laws. Morocco previously hosted 5 rounds of dialogue between Libya's disputing sides, the last of which was in January, when a mechanism for assuming sovereign positions was agreed on. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.